The year was 1868, and the plains of Texas stretched so far and wide a man could walk for days and never find the end of them. Dust rolled in from the south that summer, coating the grass, the fences, even the water troughs, until everything looked painted in the same tired brown. The cattle moved slow, ribs pressing against their hides, their tongues lolling as if begging the sky for rain. Life on a ranch was no place for the weak or the loud, and that's what folks knew about Jacob Hawthorne. He was a man of silence. He spoke when he had to, which wasn't often, and when he did, his voice was low and final, like the crack of a coffin lid. Townsfolk said he carried ghosts inside him. Some whispered he'd once been a gun hand, quicker than any man west of the Mississippi. Others claimed he lost a family in some bloody feud and had put his voice in the grave with them. None of it mattered to Jacob. He had his ranch, his horses, his cattle. That was enough. Or it had been, until the maid came limping into his life. Her name was Maria Alvarez. She'd been recommended by the pastor's wife in town, a young woman who'd lost her people on the trail and needed work. At first glance, she was plain, the kind of figure you might pass by in a crowd without a second look. But Jacob wasn't the sort to miss much. He saw the way she favored her right leg, the way she gritted her teeth when she carried buckets from the well. He saw the careful way she pulled her skirts lower when she thought no one was looking, as if to hide what lay beneath. He told himself it wasn't his concern. He hired her to keep the house, not to bring her troubles onto his land. Yet every day that Limp worked on him like a splinter, digging deeper under the skin. The sound of her uneven steps on the wooden porch in the evening scraped against his ears. When she bent to feed the chickens, the shadow on her face was not just weariness, it was fear. Jacob had lived long enough to know fear when he saw it. The prairie nights were the worst. The house creaked. Coyotes howled beyond the fence line, and Maria sat by the fire with her mending, silent unless he asked her something. He'd catch her staring into the flames, her lips pressed together hard, like she was holding back words that might ruin her if they got loose. One night, he stepped out onto the porch, pipe in hand, and looked out over the dark stretch of land. The stars were sharp above, cold and unblinking. Behind him, Maria's limp sounded again, soft, deliberate, like she wished her footfalls could disappear. Jacob closed his eyes. The silence he loved had grown restless since she arrived, carrying with it questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. It came to a breaking point during a storm. The sky cracked open with thunder that rolled across the plains like cannon fire. Rain hammered the roof and turned the dirt yard to muck. Jacob was in the barn checking the horses when he saw Maria through the downpour. She was out by the chicken coop, skirts plastered to her legs, wrestling with a feed sack too heavy for her frame. Lightning lit her silhouette, frail, bent, struggling. Then she stumbled. Jacob was at her side before she could rise. The sack spilled, grain washing away in the rain, but his eyes were fixed on her face. She tried to hide the pain, but the sharp intake of her breath gave her away. "That leg," he muttered. His voice startled her. It had been weeks since he'd said more than a handful of words at once. "What happened?" "Nothing," she whispered, struggling to rise. He caught her elbow, steadied her. His hand felt the tremor running through her arm. "Don't lie." Her eyes darted like a trapped animal's. The rain plastered her dark hair against her cheeks. For a long moment she said nothing, lips trembling as if each word might betray her. Then, with a sudden burst, the truth cracked out of her. "It was him," she said, almost a sob. "The deputy. He did this." Jacob felt a chill colder than the rain slide down his spine. She pulled back her skirt just enough to reveal the truth. A bruise, deep and ugly, wrapped around her thigh like the mark of a brand. He'd seen such marks before in the old days. Marks made not by accident, but by cruelty. She turned from him, ashamed, but the words spilled anyway. "I worked in town, scrubbing floors at the boarding house. He came drunk night after night. When I tried to leave, her breath hitched. He said if I told anyone, he'd kill me. So I ran." Jacob's jaw tightened. The rain thundered down, but inside him was a silence more dangerous than sound. He knew the law in this country wasn't carved from justice, but from the hands of men like that deputy. And if Maria was telling the truth, and Jacob knew she was, then trouble was already on its way. He carried her back to the house, set her by the fire, and for the first time in years, spoke more than a handful of words. "You're safe here," he said, "as long as you stay." But in his gut, he knew safety was a lie. Men like that didn't let go. The storm passed, but the air after felt heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. 2 days later, Jacob rode into town for supplies. The saloon was thick with tobacco smoke and whispers. He kept to the corner, hat low, listening. Sheriff's men say she ran off in the night. One ranch hand muttered, "Not just ran," another added, "Stole something. Heard tell it was papers. Important ones." The first man spat. "Don't matter what it was. Sheriff wants her back, dead or alive." Jacob's hand froze on the whiskey glass. Papers. Stolen. A deputy who'd done worse than any lawman should. He didn't need the rest spelled out. The woman in his house was now more than a runaway. She was a target. He left town before anyone could notice his silence, riding hard across the plains with dust rising in angry clouds behind him. When the ranch came into sight, the sun was setting, blood red on the horizon. Maria was out by the porch, her limp more pronounced after the storm. She looked up at him with wary eyes, and Jacob knew she was bracing for the same question he'd been carrying since the saloon. What had she brought to his doorstep? That night, he found the answer in the smallest of things. While clearing the bedding in the small room she slept in, his hand brushed against something hidden beneath her pillow. He pulled it free. A ribbon, blood-stained. The cloth frayed at one end as though ripped away in violence. He held in the firelight, his jaw clenched. The silence inside him roared. Maria stood in the doorway, her face pale as she saw what he held. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words died before they came. The only sound was the crackle of the flames and the low moan of wind against the shutters. Jacob tightened his grip on the ribbon until his knuckles whitened. The storm outside had passed. The storm inside his house had only just begun. The dawn came heavy, painted red with dust as though the earth itself bled into the horizon. Jacob Hawthorne was on the porch before the sun cleared the ridge, coffee steaming in his tin cup. He'd been awake all night. His thoughts tangled with the ribbon in his hand, the whispers from the saloon still echoing in his ears. Somewhere in town, the sheriff and his men were saddling horses, and he knew it would not be long before the sound of hooves carried across his land. Maria was inside, silent as a shadow. She moved slower now, as if the storm had wrung her strength from her. When she appeared in the doorway, the bruises under her eyes told him she hadn't slept either. The dogs barked first, their cries sharp and frantic. Then came the rumble, low, steady, growing. Dust rose from the road, the shapes of riders cutting against the pale sky. Jacob set down the cup. His hand brushed the rifle leaning by the wall. There were 6 of them, all in dust-stained coats and wide-brimmed hats, rifles glinting in the rising light. At their head was a man Jacob recognized. Deputy Clay Harlan, thick in the shoulders, his grin like a split scar. He reined up in the yard, eyes scanning the ranch house with the hunger of a wolf. "Mornin', Hawthorne." Harlan called. His voice carried the easy arrogance of a man who believed the law bent where he leaned. "Heard tell you taken in a stray. Thought we'd come pay our respects." Jacob didn't answer. He stood like stone on the porch, his silence a shield. Harlan swung down from his horse. His boots hit the dirt with a thud. "Now, I got me orders from the sheriff. A gal's run off. Stole something worth more than her life. We're to search every ranch this side of the Brazos. Nothing personal, why understand? Just the law at work." Behind him, one of the men spat and laughed. Another tugged his reins impatiently, eyeing the barn. Maria stepped back into the shadows of the doorway, but Harlan's gaze caught the movement. His grin widened. "There she is," he said softly, almost to himself, "like a rabbit hiding the brush." Jacob's hand slid to the rifle. His voice, when it came, was low and final. "You'll do no searching here." Harlan turned, mock surprise on his face. "Now, Jacob, you wouldn't go stand against the badge, would you? Sheriff won't take kindly." Jacob's silence was answer enough. His eyes never left the deputy's, and in that steady gaze was a warning older than any law. The standoff broke like dry tinder catching flame. 2 deputies spurred their horses toward the barn, shouting. Jacob moved fast. The rifle cracked, the shot punching dirt at their horses' hooves. Animals screamed, rearing, men cursing. Harlan barked an order, and the yard erupted. Boots pounded, fists swung. Jacob dropped the rifle and met the first man with his hands, the years of quiet not dulling the speed of old instincts. His fist cracked bone. Another swung a rifle stock. Jacob ducked, drove his shoulder into the man's gut, sent him sprawling into the mud. The barn door slammed open as another deputy pushed inside, hunting for Maria. She screamed, the sound cutting through the chaos like a blade. Jacob lunged, tearing the man back out by his collar, slamming him against the wall. The fight was close, savage, the kind where every breath carried the taste of blood and dust. Harlan stood back, laughing through his teeth. That's the Jacob I heard about. Man used to kill quicker than a rattler. Seems the old dog still has bite. Jacob's chest heaved. His knuckles dripped red. He said nothing. One deputy lay groaning in the mud. Another staggered away, clutching his jaw. The others mounted in haste, spooked by the sudden fury of the silent rancher. Harlan alone stayed calm, brushing the dirt from his coat. This ain't over, he said, his grin never fading. Sheriff will come himself next time. And when he does, there won't be no standing on porches, Jacob. He'll burn this place to the ground to get what he's after. With that, he swung into the saddle and wheeled his horse around. The others followed, wounded pride trailing behind them like smoke. Dust swallowed their retreat until only the barking of dogs and the sharp scent of gunpowder remained. Inside the house, Maria clutched the doorframe, her face pale, her breath ragged. Jacob stepped past her, wiped the blood from his hands, and poured water from the basin. His silence weighed heavier now, not peace, but the stillness before another storm. That night, the fire burned low, shadows crawling along the log walls. Maria sat across from Jacob, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. The bruise on her leg had darkened, and her lip trembled as if each word she held back cut her deeper. They'll come again, Jacob said. His voice was gravel, rough from disuse. She looked up, startled at the sound. They always come again, she whispered. He leaned forward. What did you take? She hesitated, her gaze flitting to the satchel at her feet. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were papers, ledgers, deeds, signatures pressed with wax. The sheriff, she said, her voice breaking. He and his men, they take land. From ranchers, from widows, anyone too weak to fight. They forge papers, claim debts that don't exist. He means to own everything from here to the river. These prove it. Jacob's hand closed around the papers. He didn't need to read them to know she spoke the truth. He'd seen men like the sheriff before, carving empires out of fear and blood. I thought if I could bring them to the judge in Austin, Maria whispered, someone would listen. But Harlan caught me. He would have killed me if I hadn't run. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back with stubborn pride. I didn't mean to bring this to your door, Senor Hawthorne. If you tell me to go, I'll go. For the first time, Jacob's silence cracked into words weighted with more than sound. No. She looked at him, eyes wide. You'll stay, he said. This land's been stained with men's greed long enough. Sheriff comes here. He won't find you alone. Maria's lips trembled, and in her eyes a faint spark returned, something that looked like hope. They sat together in the low firelight, two souls bound not by choice but by the harsh fate of the frontier. Outside, coyotes howled across the empty plains, their cries carrying a warning that felt too near. Jacob stood, walked a window, and looked out toward the dark ridge where the horizon met the stars. Far off, faint as breath, a glow trembled, torchlight moving across the land. He knew what it meant. The sheriff wasn't sending deputies this time. He was coming himself. The night bled thick with silence, the kind that stretched taut before steel broke it. Jacob Hawthorne stood at the window of his ranch house, shoulders squared, jaw tight. Outside, far off across the ridge, the glow of torchlight crawled closer. Slow, deliberate, like a serpent winding through the dark. Maria sat by the fire, her eyes wide, her hands trembling over the satchel that held the sheriff's papers. She hadn't spoken since Jacob told her the glow meant the law itself was coming. Not deputies, not hired hands. The sheriff. Jacob pulled his rifle from its rack and laid it across the table. His revolver followed, worn steel polish by years of use and years of silence. He checked the cylinder, spun it once, and snapped it shut. Maria's breath hitched at the sound. "You don't have to fight them," she whispered. "They'll kill you for me. They'll kill you for this." Her hand tapped the satchel. Jacob's gaze never left the ridge. He already killed enough. The glow grew brighter. The dogs barked, their chains rattling with frantic rage. Then the night shattered with a thunder of hooves. The sheriff's posse poured into the yard. 10 men, maybe more, shadows twisted by torchlight. At their center rode Sheriff Amos Granger himself, broad in the saddle, gray beard flowing. His badge gleamed in the firelight like a promise of death. "Jacob Hawthorne." His voice boomed across the yard. "I'll give you one chance. Send the girl out. Hand over what she stole, and I'll let your bones rot quiet on this land. Deny me, and I'll salt your earth with fire." Maria flinched at his words. Jacob stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. His silhouette cut sharp against the torchlight. He didn't answer. The sheriff chuckled, a deep, cruel sound. "That's your way, ain't it? Silence." But silence won't save her now. He raised his hand. Torches sailed through the dark, landing in the hay by the barn. Fire leapt fast and hungry, flames licking skyward. Horses screamed in terror, men shouted. The barn became an inferno in heartbeats. The first gunshot cracked, which splintered near Jacob's head. He dropped the ground and returned fire. His rifle roared, the shot punching a rider clean from the saddle. Chaos erupted. Bullets tore through windows. The ranch house shook with violence. Maria screamed, diving for cover behind the hearth. Jacob pulled her low, shoved the satchel into her arms. "Stay down." His voice thundered with command, rare and unyielding. The fight was brutal, close, and unrelenting. Deputies charged the porch, firing wild. Jacob met them with fury born of old sins and older regrets. His rifle cracked once, twice, then emptied. He drew his revolver and fired point blank, each shot deliberate, each breath steady despite the storm around him. Inside, smoke choked the air as flames from the barn spread across the yard, casting everything in a hellish glow. Maria clutched the papers to her chest, tears streaking her face, her prayers swallowed by the roar of gunfire. Jacob moved like a man reborn. He had buried his violence once, tried to drown it in silence and solitude, but tonight it surged back, fierce and unrelenting, not for himself but for her. Through the haze, Sheriff Granger dismounted, shotgun in hand, his boots sinking in the mud. His eyes burned as he advanced on the porch. "You think you can stand against me, Jacob? I own this county. I own every acre you see." His voice bellowed through the smoke. "That girl's nothing but a thief. And you, nothing but a relic hiding from ghosts." Jacob's revolver clicked empty. He hurled it aside and reached for the rifle leaning by the door. Too slow. The sheriff fired. The blast tore across the porch, exploding into splinters. Jacob staggered, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder. Maria cried out, but Jacob did not fall. He braced himself against the doorframe, raised his rifle with bloodied hands, and locked eyes with a man who called himself Law. "No more," he growled. The shot rang out. The sheriff jerked, staggered, then dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. His shotgun slipped from his grip, hitting the mud with a hollow thud. The posse faltered, their courage breaking as their leader bled out in the dirt. One deputy fired a final wild shot, but another grabbed his arm, shouting, "It's done. He's finished." Men turned, mounting horses in panic, retreating into the night with the smoke at their backs. Within minutes, the yard was littered with bodies and broken torches, the barn consumed by fire, the sheriff gasping his last. Jacob stumbled, rifle slipping from his hand. He fell to one knee, breath ragged, blood seeping through his shirt. Maria rushed to him, clutching his face in trembling hands. "You can't leave me now," she begged. "Not after all this." His eyes met hers, tired, scarred, but steady. "Not leaving," he whispered. "Not this time." The sheriff coughed, his voice weak but venomous. "You think you've won? The law don't die with me." Jacob looked down at him, silent, his breath steadying despite the wound. Maria rose, clutching the satchel. She stepped toward the dying man, her voice clear for the first time. "No, the law doesn't die. It's just been waiting for men like you to choke on your lies." The sheriff's eyes glazed, the last breath rattling in his chest. His body went still. The night held its silence once more. By dawn, the barn was nothing but ash and smoldering beams. The yard was scarred with bullet holes and bloodstains. The sheriff's body lay covered in canvas, his badge stripped, his empire ended. Jacob sat on the porch, shoulder bound in linen, his face pale but resolute. Maria sat beside him, the satchel open across her lap, its papers spread carefully on the table between them. She read them aloud, her voice steadier now. Deeds forged, signatures falsified, entire ranches stolen on ink and fear. Names of families Jacob knew, families that vanished when death swallowed them. Proof enough to hang a man twice. "Will they believe us?" she asked softly. Jacob's eyes swept the land, the endless stretch of prairie he had fought so hard to keep. "They'll have to." Sheriff's gone, his men scattered. "All that's left is truth." She nodded, though doubt lingered. "And you? Will you go with me? To Austin, to the judge? These papers, they can't stay hidden." He looked at her then, really looked. Past the bruises, past the limp, to the fire in her eyes that had survived cruelty and fear. His silence stretched long, heavy as the years he'd carried it. Finally he spoke. "I'll ride with you." Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of something fragile and new. She reached for his hand, and he let her take it. The sun broke the horizon, painting the land gold. Smoke from the barn curled into morning sky, a scar, but also a signal. Change had come to this place, carried on fire and blood. Jacob rose slowly, pain etched across his frame, but his eyes held a steadiness they hadn't in years. He looked at the empty stretch of road where the sheriff's men had fled, then back at Maria. "This land," he said, his voice low but firm, "it ain't just dirt. It's blood. It's sweat. It's every man and woman that ever tried to hold it. Sheriff thought he owned it, but it don't belong to men like him. It belongs to the ones who fight for it." Maria squeezed his hand, her voice soft but fierce. "Then we fight. Together." The narrator's voice crept in, quiet and reflective, as if the land itself spoke through memory. So the silent man found his voice in gunfire and flame. A maid with a limp became more than a shadow in his doorway. She became the proof that silence breaks when courage takes its place. Out here, the frontier was never about who owned the land. It was about who stood when the fire came. Jacob Hawthorne stood, and when the sheriff's badge turned cold in the dirt, the land knew justice for the first time in years. The wind carried the smoke across the plains, whispering the story farther than any man's word. "And if this tale speaks to you," the narrator closed, "remember this. Courage may not always roar. Sometimes it comes in silence, standing against the dark. If this story moved you, share it, because the frontier ain't gone. It just waits for the brave." The horizon burned bright with dawn. The fight was done, but the journey ahead had only just begun.